Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Helena, aka No Justice MTG, and tonight, as always on a Thursday, I am delighted to be joined by Dalia Gebrial. Dalia, how are you this fine Thursday night?
I'm doing okay. I'm alarmed by the temperature drop. Like, I feel like I've not been warm in about 4 days. So, and I get very cranky when I'm cold. So I'm sorry if you get a slightly crankier Dahlia today, but I'll try and switch it off for your beautiful self later.
I mean, I have the highest level of confidence, as always, in yourself, Dalia. Coming up tonight, we have a bombshell story about Rachel Reeves that is dragging on throughout today. The Your Party drama is continuing to unfold. We have some shock results in the Dutch elections, and the Times has been caught out in some slightly, slightly incendiary reporting that may have come back to bite them. Stay tuned for all of that. Quick one before our next story. Just your weekly reminder that today is the deadline to sign up for Ash's newsletter, The Cortado. If you want it in your inbox tomorrow morning, head to novara.media/the Cortado to see what all the fuss is about. And as ever, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. And make sure to let us know your comments in the YouTube chat. And indeed, you can always tweet at us on the hashtag NovaraLive. Now, if there's one sector of British society I do not have many good things to say about, it's our mainstream media. But I will admit, they have a knack for timing stories to inflict maximum embarrassment on our political class. Late last night, the Daily Mail published an article claiming that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, was renting out her Dulwich house without a licence, which is required by law by Southwark Council, in which the property is located. The house was freed up by Reeves moving into a flat in number 11, on the taxpayer's dime, might I add, and she'd been letting out her home ever since for the princely sum of £3,200 a month, which, as a Midlands resident, I find to be an eye watering sum of money. So not only is she a landlord, she's having her current accommodation subsidised for her to be one and charging a pretty penny for her trouble. The timing of the story could not have been worse for the government, as it was dropped just 2 days after their landmark renters' rights bill achieved royal assent. Now, to give the government credit where it's due, there is plenty to like about the bill, and it's one of Labour's very few popular pieces of legislation, as it bans no fault evictions and tackles some of the worst excesses of the landlord industry, such as rental price bidding wars, excessive deposits and upfront rental payments, and it tightens up some expectations around quality standards of the private rental sector. So, no wonder it has the Daily Mail upset. The right wing media know full well they would look like monsters if they opposed the actual content of the legislation, so have to resort to appealing to hypocrisy. That's not to say that Reeves is not a hypocrite, however, because she absolutely is one. Not only did Starmer and Reeves promise an end to scandals and the chaos of the previous Tory administration, and promising that they would uphold the highest standards in public life, Rachel Reeves herself, just last week, posted this on Twitter. I welcome Leeds City Council's decision to expand their selective landlord licensing policy to include the Armley area. While many private landlords operate in the right way, we know that lots of private tenants in Armley face problems with poorly maintained housing. This scheme means private landlords in the area will be required by law to obtain a license for any residential property that they are seeking to let, and must meet certain standards to ensure the property is safe and in a decent state of repair. Everyone deserves a safe and secure home. I look forward to continuing to work with the local community to improve conditions for renters. These are perfectly reasonable sentiments, but she can't claim ignorance at not following the same kind of rules she openly supported a week ago. That is, however, the defence that her team have decided to go with. A spokesperson for the Chancellor said this was an inadvertent mistake, and, in the spirit of transparency, she has made the Prime Minister, the independent advisor on ministerial standards, and the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards aware. A leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, remember her, also called out Labour for hypocrisy, and saying this: the Prime Minister must launch a full investigation. He once said that lawmakers cannot be lawbreakers. If, as it appears, the Chancellor has broken the law, then he will have to show he has the backbone to act. Starmer responded by ruling out such an investigation this morning. The two exchanged letters, and the Prime Minister said that he consulted with his independent ethics advisor and said that he had full confidence in the Chancellor and believed that the matter could be drawn to a close. That was, however, until this afternoon, when things became more complex yet again, as it was reported by the BBC that a Number 10 spokesperson said that new information had come to light. Following a review of emails sent and received by the Chancellor's husband, new information has come to light. This has now been passed to the Prime Minister and his independent advisor. It would be inappropriate to comment further. It is right that the independent advisor on ministerial standards looks at the relevant correspondence on this matter since the new information has come to light. It's nice to have the adults back in the room, isn't it? And so far, we've only covered the political ramifications of this. In terms of the legal ramifications, failing to obtain a license is a criminal offence, which could lead Reeves to having repaid 12 months in rent. We should be so lucky, which, according to the FT, could be as much as £38,000. At time of recording, we do not know whether or not Southwark Council had informed Reeves of whether or not she needed a licence, and they say that they only issue action against such landlords if they do not have a licence, having been informed of that necessity within 21 days. One thing is for certain, however. This is the last thing that the government needed after scandals involving high profile figures such as Angela Rayner, Morgan McSweeney, and Peter Mandelson, as well as multiple other stories of Labour MPs being less than scrupulous landlords. Remember the Jazz Athwal story, which was pretty viral, and we had other ones as well, such as Rushanara Ali having to resign as housing minister over issues in terms of herself being a landlord. Dalia, what do you think? Honest mistake, or blatant hypocrisy, or a little bit of both?
So this obviously, as you mentioned, Helena, comes off the back of just a few months after Angela Rayner was unceremoniously relegated to the backbenches because she failed to pay the right amount of council tax on her home. But unlike Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves has been given the benefit of the doubt. Now, in terms of the politics of this, obviously one can make the assumption that, or make the conjecture that Rachel Reeves is being punished less harshly than Angela Rayner because Angela Rayner was ever so slightly to the left of Keir Starmer, even though she really was not a challenge to Keir Starmer in any meaningful way. But Keir Starmer is that paranoid and that insecure that I wouldn't be surprised that merely having a deputy prime minister whose politics aligned a little bit more to the Labour Party membership would be enough to kind of spook him and try and find some excuse to get rid of her. And also not lost on me that this was a story that was published by the right wing press around the time that one of the few scraps of legislation that this Labour Party has introduced that gives something back to the people that voted for them, but would upset a lot of the landlord reading, landlord owning members of the Daily Mail, that they would try and undermine that legislation through saying that, through attacking Rachel Reeves for hypocrisy. But I think for me, what I found really frustrating about this article was not about whether or not this is about hypocrisy or whatever, but more, I mean, it is a hypocritical story, but not because Rachel Reeves is part of a government that is introducing a bill for renters whilst failing to get the right paperwork for her own landlordism. But for me, the hypocrisy really lies in the fact that Rachel Reeves has been on a warpath against what she calls benefit fraud and errors, right? Which we know that benefit fraud accounts for around 2% of benefit expenditure, and that benefit errors, so accidental overpayments, accounts for less than 1% of benefit and expenditure. And Rachel Reeves has, in collaboration with the right wing press, gone on an absolute warpath against people who have either been accidentally overpaid benefits or have been, in her eyes, fraudulently using the benefit system. And I think what I find so frustrating is that Rachel Reeves has used that warpath to basically make the experience for all people who need benefits absolutely unbearable. It has been used as a cover to increase surveillance, punishment, harsh penalties for people who are seen to be making errors or even just applying for benefits. They have to undergo so much checks and surveillance to the point that the DWP can now collaborate with your credit lenders, your insurers, your banks, all kinds of third party organizations to gather data on you in the name of protecting against benefit fraud, which makes up just 2% of benefit expenditure. And that turns the whole experience of being a benefits claimant into an incredibly dehumanizing, demeaning process, one that violates your privacy, one that makes you feel like you're a criminal for requiring benefits when needing benefits is not a crime. And that is now the experience that exists for poor people, disabled people, people who fall through the cracks of our economy. So when Rachel Reeves is being given the benefit of the doubt because it is believed that her error was what was the terminology, inadvertent. It was an inadvertent breach of the rules. I wouldn't mind giving Rachel Reeves the benefit of the doubt on that if the same benefit of the doubt was extended to the most vulnerable in our society who are subject to the most dehumanizing and invasive matrix of bureaucracy to get the measly amount of benefits that are available to the poorest and most vulnerable in this country. Because if you are a benefits claimant and you make even the tiniest error on one of your forms, or if you are perceived in any way to be possibly not quite as disabled as you should be in order to deserve benefit claimants. We all remember that story I remember the story from 2017 when a resident in Hackney who was a double amputee was told that he doesn't really have mobility issues because he was able to walk up the stairs to the benefit claimant's office. So if we gave the same amount of benefit of the doubt and grace to the most vulnerable in our society as we give to landlords and politicians, then I wouldn't mind, giving Rachel Reeves the benefit of the doubt that she wasn't aware that she needed this license. But it's actually that double standard that the richer you are, the more grace you're given, the more you're treated like a human who can make mistakes, versus when you're poor or disabled, you're treated as essentially a criminal for requiring some kind of support from the government that is supposed to represent you. That was really what came to mind when I read that term, inadvertent breach, because you're not allowed to make mistakes. You're not allowed to make inadvertent breaches if you're disabled or poor. You're treated like a criminal if you are trying to seek support and you're disabled and poor. But if you're Rachel Reeves, if you're a landlord, you're given all the benefit of the doubt and grace in the world. And that for me is the actual hypocrisy that I wish our tabloid media and our mainstream media would report on, rather than trying to use this as a gotcha in order to undermine the renters bill before it even passes.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I certainly agree with that. I think that it goes even further, like for broadly everyone in society, insofar as it's a real inversion. It's a real inversion of what should be happening here, insofar as people who are holding some of the highest offices in the country are held to a lower standard than people who have loads of really difficult material concerns right now that makes missing these things much easier. And plenty of just regular people have to go through very silly bureaucracy. There was a story I saw the other day of a woman who was fined like three figures for pouring the rest of her coffee down the drain because that's technically like contaminating the drain water. And whilst it's perfectly reasonable to have regulation about what can and can't go down drains, the idea that the benefit of the doubt wasn't extended to this one person because it was a tiny bit of coffee rather than like actual like agricultural dumping or whatever. And when the public look at people who should be held to incredibly high standards, given that they are not just the high levels of government that they are, but in the mother of all parliaments that we hold our parliament to be, the standards are so low that something as basic as following the regulation that you've praised literally a week ago is worthy of just being waved away as an inadvertent breach. I think was a really astute comparison for you to make there. How's this for some far right cope? Geert Wilders, the far right Islamophobic politician, said he was incredibly happy after Wednesday's Dutch elections left his ambitions to be Prime Minister in the mud. The votes are being counted today, and they show that things are on a knife edge. But it looks as if the centrist Democrat 66 party made spectacular gains, whilst Wilders' far right Freedom Party, the PVV, have slumped. Both parties are projected to get 26 seats each in the country's 150-seat parliament. But even if Wilders finished first, he has no viable route to government, having alienated all other parties with his hardline immigration plans. The Netherlands' ruling coalition collapsed in June when Wilders withdrew his party, claiming that his partners were blocking his proposals to halt all asylum migration. He had presented a 10-point plan full of anti migrant and anti Islam policies, including freezing asylum applications from Muslim majority countries, leaving the European Union's free movement scheme, cutting foreign aid, and severing ties with Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Here's footage of the moment Democrats' 66 supporters found out that their party had smashed it, via Eddie Wax, a reporter for Euroactive.
Ongelooflijk spannend. Twee partijen strijden in Nederland om wie de grootste wordt. En dat zijn de PVV, waar weliswaar 12 zetels afgaan. We moeten eens nu kijken wat er nu gebeurt. Voor het eerst in de geschiedenis kan
It was a bad night for the centre-left GroenLinks PVDA party. So that's a coalition between the Green Left and the Labour Party. Its leader, former EU Commissioner Frank Timmermans, resigned after gaining an underwhelming 20 seats. That's down from 25 at the last election. And so, Democrat 66 leader Rob Jetten looks certain to be the country's next prime minister. But who is he? Well, Jetten would be the Netherlands' youngest and first openly gay prime minister. He is a former junior athlete and has been described as having a positive story and a vision. He ran a centrist populist campaign using an upbeat Obama style message, taking after Obama, Het kan wel, or Yes We Can in English. Jetten is a Romaniac, centrist dad's dream. He's a staunch Eurofederalist, telling Politico, quote, "We want to stop saying no by default and start saying yes to doing more together. I cannot stress enough how dire Europe's situation will be if we do not integrate further. Positive story, vision, such things are unheard of amongst Britain's centrist drones. Dalia, do you think Keir Starmer and his pals could learn something from the Democrat 66 and Rob Yetten?"
I mean, I imagine that this is what kind of Keir Starmer imagined his premiership would look like. This was, I guess, maybe the vision that he had for how he would sort of defeat the far right. It's clearly it's not working. Reform are. I think I've seen a poll now today from Find Out Now, which actually shows that the Greens are now the second party to reform in terms of Westminster voting intention. So this kind of centrist liberal politics is not unfolding in the same way as it is in the Netherlands as it is here. The question is, to what extent is what's happening in the Netherlands like replicable or comparable to what happens in the UK? Obviously, we have very different electoral systems. In the UK, we have what I like to call a worst of both worlds when it comes to a kind of patchwork of US and European election like party vehicles. You know, we have the kind of two-party, traditionally, two-party hegemony of the US. But in the US, whilst they have those two parties, they do have a little bit more wiggle room when it comes to internal democracy. You can have insurgents running in the Democrat Party who are not necessarily part of the Democratic Party machinery. And then in Europe, you have very strong not very internally democratic parties, but you have the possibility for smaller parties, newer parties to emerge and to have leverage because of this tendency towards a coalition politics. And in the case of the Netherlands, a more proportional representation style of electoral politics. We have neither of those. We have up until now, and this very well might change in the next few years for the first time in a century nearly, we have a very, very fixed, entrenched two-party system, and those two parties are internally very undemocratic, very difficult to penetrate from the outside. But we can say that in terms of general trends, what's been happening in the Netherlands is kind of a bellwether for what's been happening in the UK, but also what's sort of rippled throughout the West. You know, you have someone like Geert Wilders, who, much like Nigel Farage, has been a long-standing presence within Dutch politics, has been largely quite fringe, but has been given so much space by the media to be presented as the main oppositional voice to establishment politics, that now sort of just 15 years following on from a financial crisis that establishment politics has failed to tackle, the one voice that has been positioned as a valid oppositional voice to the establishment was able to rise and was able to win a stomping majority, very, very similar to what could potentially happen with Reform, what looks like is on the cards for Reform and Nigel Farage. But, they're kind of experiencing it a little bit earlier than we are. Geert Wilders had his stonking majority in 2023. And so we're seeing, yes, this rise of this populist right that whose main headline policy is just brutality against migrants, specifically Muslims, and also gutting. Another part of Geert Wilders' platform is gutting climate regulation, which is also the sort of second pillar of reformism. So the question is, how do we, as people, as a country that seems to be a few years behind this trend, how do we look towards what's happening in the Netherlands as information for us and as guidance, as a bellwether for us, as an understanding of what the territory might look like if reform were to win and what they might look like a few years after power, whilst taking into account the concrete differences in electoral systems? I was speaking to a Dutch friend of mine who is in Dutch politics, and I kind of asked him, how would you explain the fallout of Geert Wilders' political popularity? And it was quite interesting what he said. He put it down to the fact that immigration was just not the main issue on the table in the debates, that housing and healthcare have really been the things that, I think maybe people have realized that Islamophobia alone is not going to pay your rent. It's not going to put a roof over your head. You need something a little bit more than that. And that Geert Wilders didn't really have a politics around housing and healthcare. He also said that basically the main reason why is because all of the mainstream parties made a pact to not go into an electoral coalition with Wilders' party, which basically made his vote a wasted vote. And so the people who would have voted and the people who vote for Wilders generally either vote for him or they stay home. So a lot of those voters just stayed home. So I think, and also that we have also seen in this election a resurgence, or not a resurgence, but a boost for other right-wing parties. So JA21 is one of them, who are also kind of a far-right party and who have gained some seats in this election. So it seems to me that probably the main two factors is a taste of far-right chaos, which the Dutch electoral system allows for more frequent elections and kind of a more flexible electoral system. So they were able to quite quickly push back against that chaos. And also the fact that all the mainstream parties got together and formed a coalition, essentially, to say, we will not work with this party because we do not stand by its far-right politics and its anti-Muslim politics. That's not what we're seeing in Britain. What we're seeing in Britain is actually the opposite, where, okay, the Labour Party are not saying that they would be willing to go into a coalition with reform, of course, neither are the Tories, but both of them are trying to ape the reform's politics when it comes to anti-immigration and racism. So they're actually, instead of taking a stand against that kind of politics, they're actually just reinforcing it from the sidelines. And what that, of course, does is it alienates and demobilizes your base. And it also doesn't convince the people that you think you're trying to convince, because those people, if what you are motivated by is an anti-immigration politics, if that is the thing that is on the ballot for you, of course you're going to go for the party that have been or the political figure that has been talking about that for decades and who that's part of his main political identity. So what we can learn from this, whilst taking into account all of the quite important differences between the Dutch political landscape and the British political landscape, what we can take into account is that simply trying to pander to that politics and ape that politics is not the way forward. That actually taking a stand against that politics is how you get the coalition that are genuinely concerned about what this kind of divisive, right-wing, hateful politics could bring us. You have to bring out you have to have a message that is going to bring those people out. Now, of course, it's a relief that the PVV have not been re-elected and that Geert Wilders will not continue to lead the Netherlands. My concern is that when I look at the policies of the party that did win, it's very much back to normal establishment politics. And whilst that is preferable to the PVV, the question is that going to be enough to stave off the rise of a different far-right party, because the main substantive issues that push people into a far-right politics are not going to be addressed. And that's something that we're going to have to wait and see about.
Yeah, I definitely agree with your analysis. And I think what's interesting is that broadly we're seeing in the wake of what's happened post-pandemic and the cost of living crisis in the ways in which the economy has been hurt by broad asset capture by the super rich. It's led to this anti-establishment, but it's almost this anti-incumbent feeling, right? Democrats 66 are not necessarily an anti-establishment party, far from it, as you say. They are back to the politics as usual. But fundamentally, there are serious problems economically that needs to be fixed broadly across Western economies because of the nature of what's happened in the last 46 years of neoliberal policy. And in a lot of countries, there has been a scapegoat, which has been migrants and minorities. And the far right have tried to capitalize on that. And in getting into government and trying to enact those policies, people, at least hopefully, are beginning to see, first of all, that rhetoric is not good in terms of the overall utility of what it is talking about, in terms of the actual people that it will affect, but that it also isn't a solution to the economic problems, the real economic problems that everybody's facing. There is a desire for something different. Like the Democrats 66 were nowhere. They were absolutely nowhere, who got shattered at the last elections in 2023. And now being able to rocket back up the polls right again in the face of an unpopular incumbent, or a reduction in popularity for the incumbent, shows that offering something different and something positive is a way of being able to win the electorate round. And I think that's what we're seeing, especially with the rise of people like Zach Polanski and a broader voice on the left of politics, which we're going to come to in a second, is that it is bringing kind of hope back to politics. It is bringing an alternative to the ways in which that people are kind of seeing that you can't actually just have a scapegoat forever. You need substantive solutions. You need to be able to oppose the actual mainstream policies that the current incumbents are trying to offer people. As you say, I don't think that Democrats 66 are going to offer anything substantial to break the real systemic problems that have led us to this point. The Labour Party has changed, something Keir Starmer insisted upon the public in the run-up to the 2024 general election. And who can forget these famous words he spoke in 2023 when he confirmed that former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn would not be allowed to run for Parliament as a Labour candidate.
If you don't like that, if you don't like the changes that we've made, I say the door is open and you can leave.
What was meant as a rhetorical device signalling a break with the socialist platform championed by Corbyn's Labour has become a prophecy for the nightmare that has been Labour's tortuous first year in office. Record low approval ratings, their lowest recorded polling numbers in history, widespread derision by the entire electorate, and membership numbers that are so embarrassing for the party they haven't even published them since February. This has been happening alongside dictatorial control over internal party processes, which have silenced dissent and alienated Labour's base. And even their elected representatives, who have been loyal to the party for many years, have jumped ship. In Nottingham, 6 councillors have resigned from the party today to create a real socialist opposition to Labour's failure. Councillors Kirsty L. Jones, AJ Matsiko, Faith Gakandjaya, Imran Jalil, Anwar Khan, and Naeem Salim have formed the Nottingham People's Alliance, who will sit as the official opposition on Nottingham City Council. They're not the first councillors in Nottinghamshire to leave Labour and sit as a new electoral grouping either. In January this year, in the neighbouring borough of Broxtowe, 20 councillors left Labour en masse in similar fashion. They currently sit as a minority administration, the Broxtowe Alliance, meaning that along with the left-wing alliance in Nottingham and otherwise in nearby Gedling, there is a broader alliance umbrella developing locally to oppose the Labour colleagues they previously sat with. So why have they decided to leave? Here's NPA councillor Kirsty L. Jones explaining why.
The Labour Party stopped the majority of councillors in Labour Group from even having a say in policy making or the political strategy of the council by imposing its leadership, doing what they're told by London, and provide no criticism of this failing Starmer government. This means that we can no longer effectively represent our residents or speak openly about our views. This has led to poor decision-making and incompetent governance of Nottingham City Council. Instead, we have seen the Labour Party make the same mistakes nationally that we have experienced first-hand locally, completely ignoring their manifesto and instead cutting winter fuel allowance, slashing disability benefits, using resources on local government reorganisation rather than meeting residents' needs, and copying the Reform Party's rhetoric, demonising migrants, refugees and other minorities rather than resolving the real issues that people face. Nottingham is a diverse and welcoming city. Our residents have a mixed up international backgrounds and connections. And it is important for us to be able to campaign and speak freely on the domestic and international issues which concern us. Instead of taking strong, decisive action on the genocide committed by Israel against the Palestinians, the Labour government has focused on criminalising people, supporting direct action against the perpetrators of war crimes. As Labour councillors, many of us have been punished for speaking out about the liberation of Palestine. This is deeply concerning for all our civil liberties, as well as horrifying how little value they place on humanity.
I mean, it's a pretty good summation of Labour's year so far. It's pretty embarrassing for the party that they can be torn down so easily. But it's true. It's all true of the reality of what people who voted Labour their whole lives are looking at the current Labour Party and what they've done. Really basic stuff that the Labour Party should be doing, such as protecting the welfare state, commitment to human rights and internationalism. Remember Harold Wilson saying that the Labour Party is a moral crusade or it is nothing? Well, in these people's opinions, clearly it is now nothing. I also spoke to Kirsty at their press release earlier today, and I started by asking her if the problems with the Labour Party extended to both a local and a national level.
They can't be separated at the moment, so our leadership was imposed by the central party. So, Keir Starmer on the NEC, they decided that we weren't able to elect our own leadership, probably because they had suspicions that we would elect a more socialist-leaning one and try and do something radical like community wealth building in Nottingham, which they can't stand at the moment. So instead, we've had to form this new progressive alternative because our voices aren't getting heard and we're not representing residents. The residents are suffering at the end of the day. They've got the cost of living crisis, they've got no services to help them. We need to do something different.
Absolutely. And what would you say to other people who are, at this point, still Labour members or Labour councillors who feel like they're in a similar position? They feel like that the current leadership doesn't represent the values that they originally had when they joined the Labour Party. And what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think all of these things have to be taken on an individual basis. So I think as a normal party member, you might have a different perspective than if you were a councillor or an MP, for example. As a member, you might think that there's still potentially manoeuvring space within Labour, but the way that they're shutting down democracy, I think that it's quite hard to actually get anything across. And there's so many other alternatives popping up now across the country, whether it's independent groups on councils or, we don't know where your party's going. The Green Party's obviously had a massive surge. There's clearly an alternative sort of desire in the public for something different, something more on the left. We've got the threat of reform, and I think that we need to have something real to tell people on where the issues that they're facing has come from. It's not migrants, it's the rich, and it's the fact that we're not structuring society properly. So I think there might be some people who feel that they can still push that message within Labour. I think it's hard to do that now, but there's these alternatives outside Labour too, and I think we've all just got to communicate together and make sure that we try and fight off this threat, basically.
So you're feeling that without a proper threat for Labour on their left, they would be complacent in terms of actually providing the kind of change that was promised in the run-up to the election in 2024, and indeed, I'm assuming was promised in terms of the administration of Nottingham City Council as well. Unless that change manifests, we're going to, as you say, be looking at a move to the right, which we don't want.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think the only way that there can be manoeuvring space for the left within Labour at the moment is if they have that challenge outside, because at the moment Labour just take vast communities' votes for granted because they feel like there's nowhere else to go, but there is somewhere to go now. Aping the rhetoric of reform is not going to help the Labour Party to get any extra votes, because people who would vote reform will vote reform, right? They're not going to go for a watered down version of this racism. Um, the left is the only way to properly challenge this, and I think, like I say beforehand, there's less manoeuvring space within Labour, so the only option I've seen for myself and our colleagues have seen together is to leave Labour and form Nottingham People's Alliance.
And this isn't the only defection the Labour Party have been hit with today either. Councillor for Frome Vale, Al-Saeed Al-Maghrabi, has left the Labour Party to join the Green Party, who already hold control of Bristol City Council in a minority and who will now have exactly half the seats on the council. Al-Maghrabi said this about his decision to leave Labour and join the Greens. While today I am leaving the Labour Party, this is only because it has become apparent over time that the party has left me. I no longer recognise the values of fairness, compassion and social justice that inspired me to join, values that I now recognise in the Green Party. From refusing to tax wealth, continuing to enable genocide, and echoing Reform's divisive rhetoric on immigration, I and many others have been deeply disappointed with the direction of the national leadership. I will never stop standing up for equality, justice, and the right to speak truth to power. These are the same principles that first brought me into public life, and principles that I now find in the Green Party. I'm incredibly excited to join the Greens, to put hope back into the politics of Bristol. When councillors resigned from Labour after Keir Starmer endorsed war crimes on LBC in 2023, a Labour Party source was quoted as saying they were shaking off the fleas. It turns out that those fleas were actually some of Labour's most loyal supporters, including their own elected representatives. Dalia, what do you think these community parties will have as an effect? And is there any way that the Labour Party can be salvaged at this point?
That's a really, really difficult question. I don't know if the Labour Party can be salvaged at this point, certainly not under this leadership. I mean, there are always going to be, as more and more people defect from the Labour Party, whether it's MPs or local politicians, there's always, Labour's always going to be able to fill those gaps with careerists of all kinds of stripes. But the problem is that careerists actually don't tend to make very good or popular local politicians because they don't actually tend to be committed to serving local people and, doing casework and getting involved in local campaigns. They just see it as sort of one rung in the ladder towards their wherever they're trying to get to. So the councillors and the people who really are working for their community and are more likely to be popular within their community are not the ones, I would assume, that are staying in the Labour Party, but are actually very frustrated with how, as Kirsty outlined in that clip, how hamstrung they feel from delivering from their community because of the sort of iron grip that the Central Labour Party holds on them. And I have to say, I am so glad to see all these alternative political vehicles emerging. Now is the time to build something different, because Labour have always relied on, you lot have nowhere else to go. Where are you going to go? The Tories? If you're working class, if you're disabled, if you're a person of colour, you're not going to go to the Tories. All you can do is go here. And they've been using that to discipline us into co-signing programmes that have fallen way short of what we deserve. And now at this moment in history, that idea of where else can you go is just not going to cut it anymore, because the rise of reform has shown us many ugly things about this country, but it's also shown us that two-party system is failing, and that at this moment it is possible for a third party to break through. And now the Greens are showing us that there's no reason why that party that breaks through has to be a far right one. So I am really glad that people really rooted in their community are taking this action, and it's very brave and it's very bold, and it's amazing. The question is how do we sort of consolidate this power that is away from just kind of local pockets into an electoral vehicle that can really make a difference? And that is quite difficult to do in British politics because we don't have a tradition of coalitions between parties. But I think it requires some really imaginative, innovative thinking about how do we bring the work that's happening around the Green Party, the work that's happening in these more kind of independent local groups, and also the things that are coalescing around your party. How do we make sure that gets consolidated into a united front? I saw a I saw a clip earlier today of what was her name? Kathy Hochul, who is the governor of New York, and she's a sort of traditional establishment Democrat, and she was opening a rally where Zoran Mamdani was speaking. And, this is someone who has climbed up the ranks of the Democratic Party, very much sits within an establishment politics. And, she got up on stage and she was just drowned out by people shouting, "Tax the rich." And they only stopped when Zoran Mamdani came out and held her hand. And in that moment, you could see that it dawned on her that her political career is nothing without the Mamdani coalition. And that's the same signal that we need to send to people in the politically powerful in this country, that you will not be able, whatever party you are, you will not be able to govern without taking into account the concerns of this coalition that is building and growing. And as far as the Labour Party are concerned, they deserve everything that is happening to them. I read somewhere today that the Labour government, the current government, is less popular than Prince Andrew, which is that's a real achievement. Honestly, even my worst nightmares could not have imagined that they would have been able to clear that bar, which is in hell. But they absolutely deserve it, because I have never seen such an effective coalition building project where the coalition that you're trying to build is the widest cross-section of pissed off people in British society. Like, they're alienating the left by pandering to anti-immigration politics, by pandering to a genocidal state. They're alienating older voters by scrapping the winter fuel benefit. They're alienating younger voters by refusing to deliver on the things that younger voters care about, like wealth distribution, stuff on climate. They're alienating the poor by cracking down on benefits. And they're bringing in policies that politically engaged people across the spectrum hate, like digital IDs. So it's like, if you're going to, when the grown-ups in the room come in and the grown-ups in the room decide to create a program that literally brings together the widest cross-section of people in British society in hatred of your project, what did you expect was going to happen? Well, what they expected was going to happen was that the British people would feel like they had so little choice that if you didn't want reform to get into power, you would have to vote for Labour. But what the Green Party is showing, and what these alternative political vehicles that are popping up around the country are showing, is that that is not how this is going to play out. It might have played out like that 10 years ago, but that's not how it's going to play out now. The question is, how does that consolidate into something that is united and is a cohesive political vehicle? And that is the challenge that we face.
It was incredibly perceptive of you to talk about the fact these people are rooted in their community very specifically. I didn't play the full clip of Kirsty's speech at the press release earlier today. The full clip is on Twitter. You can go and find it and watch it all in full. And one of the first things that they talk about broadly is about the failures of Nottingham City Council locally, outsourcing services, failure on dealing with the problems of homelessness, things such as closing community centres and libraries, these kind of basic things that people in the community really care about. And you can tell from the conversations that I had with people in the press release earlier today that they do genuinely care. They really want to be able to serve the people that they're there to represent, that elected them, on, a promise of change, a promise of hope, a promise of delivery for what people genuinely care about in the local area. And Milan Radulovic, who is the leader of Broxtowe Council, who is a member of the Broxtowe Alliance, who was there, made a very important point here, which is that, the people are there to elect their representatives, and that's what their representatives are there to do, and to represent them, and not the other way around. And fundamentally, if you don't have a political project that brings people along democratically, both within the party and outside the party, then you will never actually represent the people. You will never actually be beholden to the interests of your constituents rather than central party policy. And the fact that they are making sure that they're there to represent Nottingham specifically, forming a community independent party, shows you just how much they do care about the people who live around in those communities. And it's bigger actually for them than just about whether the Labour Party is good or bad. They really have this genuine connection to their electorate, which you don't see amongst the career politicians in Westminster. Rupert Murdoch's British newspaper The Times came for New York mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani this week, and they failed in a level of truly epic proportions. Now, this story truly is bizarre, so hold with me. The right-wing British newspaper of record ran a story on Tuesday about how former New York Mayor Bill de Blasio thinks Mamdani's numbers don't add up. They quoted the ex-mayor saying, "In my view, the maths doesn't hold up under scrutiny, and the political hurdles are substantial. This would be a big deal, because de Blasio has supported Mamdani's campaign. There's just one very, very small problem." Totally untrue. Blasio took to Twitter to say this. "I want to be 100% clear. The story in the Times of London is entirely false and fabricated. It was just brought to my attention and I'm appalled. I never spoke to that reporter and never said those things. Those quotes aren't mine and they don't reflect my views." In a statement, News UK said it had apologised to Bill de Blasio and removed the article immediately. It said, "Our reporter had been misled by an individual falsely claiming to be the former New York mayor." US website Semaphore, which reported on the story, reached out to a Gmail address believed to be the one used by the Times. Semaphore got a response from the address which said, "You are correct. It was me, the real Bill de Blasio." Then correspondence dried up. Semaphore said that the Times' drive for anti-Mamdani stories comes from its US content director Margie Colkin. He used to work at the New York Post, a right-wing tabloid, and the Free Press, another right-wing publication. Dalia, this is a pretty gigantic failure, right? For the paper of record? Supposed paper of record?
I mean, first of all, it's like the most New York thing I've ever heard of like some guy just being like, some random dude just being like, "Oh, the Times just want to know my opinion on this mayoral election. Like, I'm just going to give it." I mean, it's very, and I do appreciate that about this story. I also think it was unfair that the Times said, this was a hoax, as if like he got in touch pretending to be Bill de Blasio, when it's like, no, you had the wrong email and you didn't check that you had the right email. And, the guy replied and you printed that without fact checking. So really, this is on you. This is not on the guy. But I think for me, what it shows is that the right-wing press, when it comes to delegitimizing progressive popular candidates, they are like a dog with a bone. Like, they will do like that. Whoever wrote that paper, whatever reporter wrote that article, would have been given a directive by their editor. Find something get Bill de Blasio to say something on record that is negative about Zohran Mamdani, because they know, Bill de Blasio was mayor of New York. The fact that he endorsed Zohran Mamdani was very key in Zohran's campaign. And, if they can find a way to drive a wedge between the kind of Bill de Blasio, people who have fond memories of Bill de Blasio, and people who want to vote Zohran Mamdani, if they can drive a wedge in that kind of coalition, then that could, be a knock for Mamdani's chances. Although, of course, time is running out for them. But they are so desperate to throw all these resources at undermining an organically popular local progressive politician, that it's like all standards just kind of go out of the window. And I can imagine that reporter was just doing absolutely anything he could. And the minute he got a nugget of something that could fulfill the headline that they wanted to write from the beginning, they just took it and ran with it. And that's not journalism, because journalism, you're supposed to be going into the field with an open mind and actually gathering information and seeing what the lay of the land is. You're not supposed to be constructing narratives and then just trying to cherry pick evidence to find to fulfill that narrative. And whilst this is a really egregious example of journalistic malpractice, I would say that it is the extreme end of a spectrum that actually exists across a lot of our right-wing media, which is that they decide what the narrative is that they want to perpetuate, and they go out looking for the evidence to fulfill it, which is bad journalism. And it's not journalism to begin with, because it's not entering things with a real curiosity. It's going into things with an agenda and with a narrative and a story that you are trying to construct that conveniently always goes against people who want to form an economy or a politics that is more democratic and that takes a little bit of power away from the kind of people who own those newspapers. And they see their job as storytelling and propagandistic rather than as actually trying to find out what the real facts are on the ground. So it's obviously embarrassing. It's an obvious example of malpractice, of a very humiliating mistake for what's supposed to be a reputable newspaper. But what I would say is it's actually just an extreme version of a practice that the right-wing press use on a daily basis, which is they have the story first and then they go looking for things to pad that narrative out.
I think I might email the Times tomorrow and say I'm a Nigerian prince with 20,000 US dollars to put into their bank account. I'll see what response I get. We've talked a lot on tonight's show about the strife surrounding the current Labour government, but it turns out you can take the politician out of the Labour Party drama, but you can't take the Labour Party drama out of the politician. Ever since it was announced that former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn and former Labour MP Zara Sultana were to co-found a new left-wing political party, they have been beset by infighting and factional warfare. Things reached a surreal nadir when a membership portal was launched without the full knowledge of half of those who were part of the founding of the party, only for the portal to be retracted and replaced with another. Despite the threat of legal action of the first portal launch, it appeared that things had been somewhat patched up between the two halves of the party, as both Sultana and Corbyn appeared at a campaign event together with internal divisions seemingly water under the bridge. That was until this week, however, when a message was sent out by your party, which is the provisional name of the new political party, asking for those who signed up under the original portal to fill in a form to migrate their membership across to the new system. So broadly, it states that they're still members if they signed up on the previous portal, and to let them know so that they can be migrated across, because the membership data is being held by a different company, MOU Operations Limited, and they say they have no way to access those memberships. And they finish the statements very specifically saying that they should cancel direct debit if they have one to MOU operations. And they want to say sorry. We know the situation has caused significant uncertainty and stress. As an apology for the inconvenience, affected members will receive a 3 months free membership. Over the past month, we have done everything possible to secure the transfer of your membership data. Zara, Jeremy, Shokat, Adnan, Ayub, and Iqbal have all made written requests to MOU for the transfer to happen, but illegal issues around ownership of the data, which are beyond your party's control, have so far proved intractable. That's why with time passing, we're taking this step. Those names there are of the independent MPs who were part of the launch of the independent alliance that became your party as it stands today. This was followed by briefings on Tuesday reported by The Guardian that the Your Party founders were considering launching legal action against MOU Operations Limited, a legal entity set up to handle the party's assets to recover around £800,000 in donations currently held by the company. MOU was run by North of Tyne Mayor Jamie Driscoll, former Labour MP Beth Winter, and Andrew Feinstein, the anti-apartheid activist who ran against Keir Starmer at the last general election. They were in charge when MOU launched the initial membership portal. Last night, the three put out a joint public statement around the issues of the transferal of member data from the initial system to the new unitary system, under a company known under the party's current working title, Your Party Limited. And I'll be reading the statement in full. We would like to announce our resignations as directors of MOU Operations Limited. We set up MOU on the April 2nd, 2025 to support the creation of an alliance of progressive community independence, with Jeremy Corbyn playing a central role in its formation. Since that time, the nature of the project has changed significantly, as have the people involved. We are not founders of Your Party. We've had no part in any decisions concerning Your Party since before its creation was announced in July. We set up no portals, donations pages, membership systems, or anything else. We have not been involved in any of the founding processes in any way. The role of holding donations was thrust upon us. The company we are responsible for has repeatedly been used without our agreement. From the day of the launch, we have raised concerns about the lack of agreement and appropriate governance. We asked the Your Party leadership to meet with us to resolve it. We have wanted to hand over everything from the beginning. Only one of their directors agreed. After the confusing launch of the two membership systems on the 18th and 24th of September, neither of which we had any part in, we faced the added complication of MOU holding data and membership records. We urgently took legal advice, and on the 29th of September, we wrote to the Your Party leadership asking them to take complete ownership and central control of MOU. This would have handed over all the data, money, and everything else to Your Party. 5 of the 6 MPs declined. Your Party demanded control of MOU's assets without accepting the control of MOU itself. This would have left us to deal with the liabilities and costs from the confused membership launches. We cannot accept personal liability for actions that were taken without our knowledge or approval, nor could we agree to a proposed resolution that put MOU at risk of having liabilities exceeding its assets. We explained in detail why these proposals were not tenable. We were told that refusal will result in public condemnation. We have tried many times to hand over everything to your party, lock, stock, and barrel. You simply cannot hand over data without following GDPR regulations. Not everyone understands company law or GDPR. In simple terms, we offered to hand over ownership to your party and make the 6 your party MPs directors in our place, giving them full control. Only one of the 6 was willing to agree. We have been extraordinarily patient and tried to resolve this quietly behind the scenes. Your party have claimed in emails and social media statements that we delayed the data transfer. We repeatedly asked them to stop making factually incorrect claims of this nature. They gave hostile briefings to journalists. We have behaved with integrity. Zara Sultana has agreed to become the sole member and director of MOU with a commitment to use the resources for your party, as was always intended. We will resign immediately once the legal formalities have been completed. We will have no further involvement with MOU. We want nothing for ourselves. We have taken no money or no benefit in kind. It all seems very difficult to know who to believe given the conflicting information. But today, the Canary website revealed internal emails that appeared to back up the version of events offered up by the MOU directors. The emails seemed to show that your party had not been actively engaging with the legal and practical requirements to facilitate the handover of the information, despite being contacted by MOU directors to try and ensure that those requirements were followed. One thing is for certain. This is one almighty mess. Dalia, what do you think the future is for your party?
Honestly, I don't know if I even care at this point. I mean, look, I'm not partial to any faction within this. I don't have any information more than what we see in the public. I will say that I am more inclined to trust the version of events that come from directly from the horse's mouth, a kind of a detailed statement outlining everything that has taken place, where people sign it with their names. I'm more inclined to trust that than I am to trust, anonymous briefings to the press. I think that if you anonymously brief against people who are meant to be in your movement to the right-wing press, I think it's unforgivable behavior. But I don't have a necessarily a pull towards one side or the other. But as far as I'm concerned, I think that this is becoming a sinkhole of hope, and just it's becoming a place where when I look at what's happening, what's the latest with your party, it's like I'm drained rather than emboldened and empowered. And that is not what a political project should be doing. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I am look, you guys figure this out, build it, and see if we come. But for now, I don't think that anyone should be wasting any time when it comes to taking action, whether it's getting involved in these local independent community initiatives, getting involved in the Green Party, whatever makes sense for where you are. There are some parts of the country where it's very unlikely that the Greens would win or do well. And so maybe something different. There needs to be a different strategy, maybe, running independent councillors, running independent MPs. If you are in a place where there could potentially be a Green base, go for that. And let's see what your party do with, their conference and everything. But at the moment, anything that is draining you of the hope or making you feel like it's not possible because it's so messy is counterproductive at this point. Because what I will say is that things look very dire in this country at the moment. We are looking down the barrel of a reform majority. The polls are looking scary. But one thing that we have that, people in the US didn't have, for example, or people in the Netherlands, as we spoke about earlier today, didn't have in 2023, is foresight and luxury of time. We have the luxury of foresight. We have time. We have 3 years before there's going to be a general election in this country. A lot can happen in 3 years. And so we actually do have the time to turn this thing around. And we should not be spending time trying to hash out conflicts between people who are putting up lawsuits and briefing the press and, getting bogged in the weeds of of bureaucracy rather than saying, what's our vision to the people? Because what I will say is that, for those of us who watch Novara, those of us who kind of follow these things very keenly, we're getting embroiled in the details and trying to think, who do we trust? What's going on? Da, da, da. For the vast majority of people who would be inclined to vote for a left alternative to reform, they're just getting the headlines of this. And the headlines of this is two things. One, fighting chaos, disunity. And the second thing is they messed up with people's money. And one thing about the British people is they don't forgive you when you mess up their money, when people sign up for a direct debit and then there's confusion about where that money is going. I don't think people ever forget that. And so there's going to be a lot of work. And look, anything is possible. It is possible that this time next year, your party will have gotten it together. They will have a great program. They will have a great community organizing strategy, and they will be able to go for the seats that the Green Party can't win in or are unlikely to win in. And then there can be a kind of strategic electoral coalition where, the Greens stand down in certain seats, your party stands down in certain seats. Great. I will be so behind that and I will eat my words. But at the moment, we can't keep being drawn back into these conflicts between individuals and people that, most of us have never met. We need to do whatever it is that makes sense in our local area to build an anti-fascist coalition against reform in 2029. We've got the time to do it. The people in the US who are currently having people of color being randomly abducted in the street by ICE, they don't have that luxury. We do, and we should make use of it.
Yep, I think you're absolutely on the money there. I would say I think that one thing again, full disclosure, I probably have to say this every show now because I am a Green Party member, very actively involved. So I want to make that very clear when I say this. But one thing that I have really enjoyed as being a member of the Green Party personally is that it doesn't feel like there's any infighting, which is, as someone who is at least tangentially related to Labour politics through being in an affiliated trade union, has been one of the things that I've been the most tedious. And so seeing that kind of infighting reflected in the kind of the founding nature of your party, I think it's very, very disheartening. More voices that are adding to the chorus of those that opposes what Labour are doing in aping the politics of the right is more than welcome. But in terms of like an electoral vehicle, these kind of problems, as you say, need to be hashed out. They need to be in the rear view mirror. They need to be squashed down so that we can unite, not around personalities or around individuals, or even necessarily around a specific political party or vehicle, but a project, a broader coalition, a broader mass movement of people to oppose what we're seeing in the mainstream of politics as it veers off to the right and seemingly uncontrollably. And that will involve discipline. It will involve people who put politics and indeed put ideology above people. And that's the thing I think that your party need to get over, because fundamentally these are people whose politics I absolutely agree with on 95% of issues. And so having them in the tent rather than outside the tent is more than welcome. But when we've got these kind of clashes of personalities happening, it really undermines the strength of that coalition. I just hope that they can pull it together so we can have as many people as possible as part of that mass movement. As always, thank you very much for joining me for Ladies' Night, Dalia.
Thanks for having me, Helena.
And thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be back from tomorrow at 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.